He needed a job. He didn't know he'd just walked into his mother's company. One little girl. One impossible promise. And a secret he could never let her see. 15 years of silence. And there she was, staring back at him from a painting. She saw him before anyone else bothered to look. One photograph. 15 years of secrets. And a truth about to change everything.
If you have ever held a sleeping child in your arms at 2 in the morning while wondering how you were going to pay the electric bill, this story is for you. And if it moves you even a little, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe before we begin, because stories like this one deserve to be shared. What you are about to hear is the story of a man who scrubbed floors for a woman he didn't know was his mother, all so he could look his daughter in the eye every night and tell her the truth, that her father never stopped fighting for her. Stay until the end, because the twist in this story will change the way you think about the people who empty your trash cans and mop your hallways. Ethan Cole was 34 years old, and he could count on one hand the number of nights in the last 2 years he had slept more than 5 hours. He lived in a narrow 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, the kind with a radiator that it clanked like a dying engine, and a landlord who never answered his phone. On the wall above the second-hand couch hung a single photograph. Ethan, younger and less tired, standing beside a woman with laughing eyes, holding a newborn girl wrapped in a yellow blanket. His wife had died 3 years earlier, a car accident on a rain-slicked highway that had taken her in an instant and left Ethan to raise their daughter, Lily, alone. Lily was 6 now. With wild, curly hair she refused to let anyone brush, and a habit of asking questions that cut straight through her father's carefully maintained composure. "Daddy, why do you always look so tired?" she had asked him that morning, spooning cereal into her mouth with the seriousness of a tiny judge. Ethan had smiled the smile he saved just for her, the one that cost him more than she would ever know, and told her that daddies just got tired sometimes. He did not tell her that he had lost his engineering job 8 months earlier when the firm downsized, that his savings had shrunk to less than $400, or that the letter from Lily's school about the upcoming tuition increase sat unopened in a drawer because he was afraid of what it would say. The 8 months since the layoff had worn Ethan down in ways he tried hard to hide from Lily. He had sent out over 200 applications, sat through 11 interviews that led nowhere, and watched his savings account shrink one automatic withdrawal at a time. Rent, insurance, the small mountain of medical bills that had followed his wife's accident and never quite disappeared. He remembered the night of the accident more clearly than he wanted to. The phone call at 11:47 p.m. The drive to the hospital with his hands shaking so badly he nearly missed the turn. The doctor's careful, rehearsed words that told him everything before they finished the sentence. Lily had been 3 years old, too young to remember her mother's laugh, and Ethan had spent every year since trying to keep that laugh alive for her, through photographs and stories, even as his own grief settled into something he carried quietly, like a second job no one saw him clock into. He had promised himself, standing in that hospital hallway, that Lily would never once feel the absence of a parent who was trying. Losing his job had felt like breaking that promise before he'd even had the chance to keep it. That was the morning Ethan saw the job posting. Whitfield Industries, one of the largest holding companies in the city, was hiring janitorial staff for its downtown headquarters, the gleaming 40-story glass tower that Ethan had walked past 100 times without ever imagining he would set foot inside. The pay was modest but steady, with benefits, and more importantly, it was immediate. Ethan almost didn't apply. He had a degree in mechanical engineering, 4 years of experience managing manufacturing lines, and a pride that flinched at the thought of pushing a mop cart through the same lobby where men in $1,000 suits discussed mergers over coffee. But pride does not pay for a 6-year-old's shoes. and it does not keep the lights on. He applied that night, and 3 days later, he was standing in a supply closet on the 14th floor of Whitfield Tower, buttoning a gray uniform with his name stitched crookedly above the pocket, staring at his own reflection in a window, and wondering how he had gotten here. What Ethan did not know, what he could not have known, because his mother had walked out of his life when he was 19 years old, disappearing into a world of boardrooms and acquisitions after a bitter falling out neither of them had ever fully repaired, was that Whitfield Industries belonged to Diane Whitfield, his mother, the woman whose face occasionally appeared in business magazines Ethan never read, whose name he had not spoken aloud in over a decade, was the very woman whose empire he now cleaned each night. He had gone by his late wife's surname, Cole, ever since their marriage, a quiet act of separation from a childhood he preferred to forget. Diane Whitfield, for her part, had no reason to walk the 14th floor after hours, and even less reason to recognize the tired young man emptying her employees' trash bins as the son she had lost touch with 15 years earlier. The cleaning shift ran from 6 in the evening until midnight, which meant Ethan overlapped, for one crucial hour, with the last stragglers of the marketing department, the ones who stayed late chasing deadlines. That was how he met Sophia Reyes. She was the creative director for Whitfield's flagship brand division, 31 years old, with warm brown eyes that seemed permanently amused by some private joke, and a habit of talking to everyone in the building as if they were the most interesting person she'd spoken to all day. The executives, the interns, and, on the second Tuesday of Ethan's employment, the new janitor, emptying the recycling bin beside her desk. "You're new," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "You alphabetized the supply closet. Nobody does that unless they've either terrified of the last guy who worked here or secretly an engineer." Ethan had laughed before he could stop himself. A real laugh, the first one in longer than he could remember, and told her he used to be an engineer, actually. Sophia looked up properly then, studying him with the frank curiosity of someone deciding whether a stranger was worth knowing, and said, "Well, that explains the trash cans. You've lined them up by height." From that night on, whenever Sophia worked late, she found a reason to talk to Ethan about the ridiculous ad campaign her boss had approved, about the coffee machine on the 8th floor that only worked if you hit it twice, about nothing in particular, which somehow felt like everything. Over the following weeks, something unhurried and honest grew between them. Ethan told her, carefully, that he was a widower raising a daughter alone, though he left out the tuition letter and the $400. Sophia told him about growing up the daughter of a single mother who cleaned hotel rooms to put her through design school, which was, she said, part of why she never looked past the cleaning staff the way some of her colleagues did. She remembered whose hands kept the lights on. She began leaving a coffee on his cart some nights, and once, when Lily had a fever and Ethan had to take an unpaid half-day, Sophia noticed his absence and asked about it the next evening, with a concern that startled him with its sincerity. He found himself waiting for those late hours, the way he used to wait for weekends as a kid. A small, bright window in an otherwise gray stretch of days. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself a creative director did not fall for a janitor, and a janitor with a daughter to raise had no business hoping she might. There was the night Sophia stayed until nearly 11, finishing a campaign pitch, and Ethan, without being asked, brought her a cup of the burnt breakroom coffee, doctored with 3 creamers because she had once mentioned, in passing, that she liked it sweet. She looked at the cup, then at him, and said nothing for a long moment, before quietly telling him it was the nicest thing anyone at the company had done for her all year, which she said half as a joke and half as something she meant completely. There was the Friday. She showed him a mock-up for a children's clothing campaign, and asked, seriously, what a 6-year-old would think of it, and stood there listening to his answer, as if it mattered as much as any executive's opinion. There was the evening. A storm knocked out the trains, and Sophia, seeing Ethan waiting at the bus, stop in the rain, because his car had broken down weeks earlier, and he hadn't the money to fix it, pulled up in her small blue hatchback, and drove him, and, twice a week after that, drove him home, without either of them ever quite calling it a routine, though it became one. She met Lily once, by accident, when a babysitter fell through, and Ethan had no choice but to bring his daughter to sit quietly in the break room during his shift. Sophia found them there over a shared bag of pretzels, and instead of reporting the policy violation, she knelt down to Lily's height and asked her, with total seriousness, whether she preferred glitter pens or regular pens, a question Lily answered with the gravity of a philosopher. Ethan watched the two of them from across the room, and felt something in his chest loosen that had been clenched shut since the accident. But hope, once it takes root, is a stubborn thing. 3 months into the job, Ethan was promoted to lead night supervisor, a title that came with a small raise and a key card that let him into more of the building than before. It was on one of those newly accessible floors, the 40th, the executive suite, empty at 11 at night, except for the low hum of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows, that Ethan first saw the portrait hanging outside the chairwoman's office. Diane Whitfield, silver-streaked hair swept back, sharp gray eyes that had not softened with the years, staring out from an oil painting commissioned for the company's 20th anniversary. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, his cart forgotten, staring at the mother he had not spoken to since he was 19, the mother who had chosen the company over him after his father's death, who had missed his wedding, who had never met her own granddaughter. For one wild, disorienting moment, he considered quitting on the spot, walking out into the night and never coming back, before the practical, exhausted part of him, the part that thought in tuition bills and grocery budgets, reminded him that Whitfield Industries paid better than anywhere else that had called him back in 8 months, and that his daughter's stability mattered more than his pride's demand for distance. He decided, standing there beneath his mother's painted gaze, that he would simply become invisible to her, the way he had already made himself invisible to nearly everyone else in his old life. Present, competent, and unremarkable. A man in a gray uniform, who did not so much as raise his eyes when the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. His hands shook as he finished his rounds that night. He did not sleep at all. The trouble started with Marcus Dell, the facilities director, who had interviewed Ethan on his first day, and seemed, from the beginning, unsettled by a man who alphabetized supply closets and spoke like someone with an engineering degree, rather than someone content to stay in his lane. Marcus had noticed Sophia lingering by the janitor's cart some evenings, had noticed the coffee, had noticed the easy laughter that did not belong, in his mind, between a creative director and a member of the cleaning staff. He began finding small reasons to write Ethan up. A supply closet not locked precisely on schedule, a rerouted elevator that delayed a floor's trash collection by 11 minutes, building, paperwork by paperwork, a case that had less to do with Ethan's performance and everything to do with a man who did not like watching the boundaries of his hierarchy blur. When Sophia found out, she confronted Marcus directly in a hallway, loud enough that 2 interns pretended very hard not to listen, telling him that if he had a problem with her friendships, he could take it up with HR, and that the last time she checked, competence did not come with a dress code. Ethan asked her not to fight his battles for him, worried it would cost her standing in the company, and Sophia had looked at him with an exasperation that softened halfway through into something gentler. "I'm not fighting your battle," she told him. "I'm just refusing to pretend I don't see you. There's a difference." The write-ups quietly stopped after that, but Marcus's cold stare in the elevator did not, and Ethan carried the small, familiar dread of a man who knew his footing in the world remained one bad report away from collapsing. He did not tell Sophia. He told himself there was nothing to tell. He was not going to march into Diane Whitfield's office and announce himself. Not after everything. Not when the only thing he had left of value was the quiet dignity of building something for Lily with his own 2 hands, unaided by the mother who had never once offered. But secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst possible moment. 2 weeks later, at the company's annual gala, a black tie event, Ethan was assigned to help staff for the evening, moving discreetly among the crowd, refilling glasses and clearing plates. Diane Whitfield crossed the ballroom floor for reasons no one, least of all Ethan, could have predicted. A photograph. Someone from HR had pinned up employee spotlight photos near the coat check, a small gesture meant to honor staff across every department, and among the smiling faces of accountants and analysts was Ethan's, taken for his badge 3 months earlier. Diane stopped in front of it, the way a person stops when the ground shifts beneath them. She stood there long enough that a passing board member asked if she was all right. She said nothing. She simply stared at the face of the son she had convinced herself, for 15 years, she had every right to have lost. Sophia found Ethan first. She had seen Diane at the photo board, had seen the color drain from the chairwoman's face, and some instinct, the same instinct that had made her notice a lonely man alphabetizing a supply closet, told her something enormous was unfolding. She pulled Ethan aside near the kitchen doors, her voice low and urgent. "Ethan, Diane Whitfield is standing in the ballroom staring at your badge photo, like she's seen a ghost. Is there something you need to tell me?" And there, amid the clatter of catering trays and the distant swell of a string quartet, Ethan finally told her everything. His real name. The mother who had chosen an empire over her own son. The falling out he had carried like a stone in his chest for 15 years. And the bitter, complicated irony of ending up cleaning the floors of the very tower she had built. Sophia listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she did not recoil the way he had feared she might. She took his hand instead. "That doesn't change who you are to me," she said. "But I think you need to go talk to her. Not for the company. For you. For Lily." Ethan stood outside that anteroom for nearly a full minute before he could make himself open. The door, running through 15 years of imagined confrontations, none of which had ever taken place in a rented waiter's jacket, with catering trays clattering somewhere behind him. He thought of every birthday that had passed without a call, every milestone celebrated without her, the wedding she had chosen a shareholder meeting over attending, the funeral for his father she had shown up too late and left early from, already checking her phone in the parking lot. He thought, too, of Lily, asleep at home with the babysitter, unaware that the grandmother she had never met was standing 30 feet away, with tears threatening to ruin 15 years of carefully maintained composure. Sophia squeezed his hand once before letting go, telling him she would be right outside, that he did not have to do this alone, but he did have to do it himself. Ethan nodded and pushed open the door. Diane was waiting for him in the small anteroom off the ballroom when he found the courage to approach. Her composure cracked in a way none of her employees had ever witnessed. "Ethan," she said, and his name in her voice, after 15 years of silence, nearly broke something open in his chest. "I didn't know. I swear to you. I didn't know you were here. I saw the photo and I thought I was imagining things." Ethan wanted to be angry. He had rehearsed anger for 15 years. Every unanswered call and missed birthday distilled into a speech he had never delivered. But standing there in his rented waiter's jacket, exhausted from months of grief disguised as busyness, all that came out was the truth. "I took a job cleaning your building because I lost everything, and I couldn't tell my daughter that her father had failed her. I didn't come here to find you. I came here because I had nowhere else to go." Diane's eyes filled, and for the first time in Ethan's memory, his mother looked less like a chairwoman and more like a woman who had spent 15 years regretting a choice she could never take back. "I have a granddaughter," she said quietly, as though testing whether the words were real. "I have a granddaughter I've never met, because I chose this building over my own son. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. I don't expect you to forgive me at all. But please, let me try to be something to her. Let me try to be something to you." The weeks that followed were not simple, and this story would be lying if it promised you they were. Ethan did not fall into his mother's arms, and forget 15 years of absence. There were long, difficult conversations, apologies that felt too small for the wound they were meant to heal, and moments when Ethan nearly walked away for good. But Diane did something she had never done in Ethan's entire adult life. She showed up. She came to Lily's school recital and cried in the third row. She sat across from Ethan at a diner near his apartment, not a boardroom, and listened, really listened, to what 15 years of silence had cost him. She quietly transferred the tuition balance at Lily's school without a word, and when Ethan found out and tried to refuse it, she told him it wasn't charity. It was 15 birthdays worth of gifts she never got to give. The first time Diane met her granddaughter properly, in the small living room of Ethan's apartment rather than any boardroom, she brought no assistants and no gifts wrapped in company letterhead, only a small wooden music box that had belonged to her own mother, and she sat on the floor in her tailored suit, knees creaking, while Lily solemnly explained the rules of a card game she had invented herself. Ethan watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, half expecting to feel resentment, and finding, instead, something quieter and more complicated. The sight of his mother, finally showing up. 15 years and one granddaughter too late, but showing up all the same. Marcus Dell resigned 2 weeks after the gala. Once word spread quietly through the building about who Ethan really was. Whether out of embarrassment or the sudden fear of consequences he could not predict, no one was certain, and Ethan found he did not much care either way. The small cruelties of the jours. Past months mattered less to him now than the future he was fighting to build. Diane offered, more than once, to simply give Ethan a title and an office, to erase the previous months entirely, as though they had never happened. And each time Ethan refused, telling her that the version of himself who had earned his own way, who had learned exactly how much his own 2 hands were worth, without her name behind them, was not a version of himself he was willing to erase. It was, he realized, the first time in his life he had ever told his mother no, and watched her actually listen. Slowly, imperfectly, something like a family began rebuilding itself from the wreckage, and through all of it, Sophia stayed. She did not treat Ethan differently once she learned he was the estranged son of the company's chairwoman. If anything, she seemed to love him more fiercely for the years he had spent, choosing his daughter over his own comfort, for scrubbing floors, rather than trading on a name he refused to use. On a quiet evening 6 months after the gala, Ethan took Sophia to the rooftop garden of Whitfield Tower, the same building where he had once emptied trash cans in the dark, now lit gold with the last of the sunset. Lily was there too, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself, grinning the gap-toothed grin of a 6-year-old who had been let in on a secret. Ethan knelt down, not because tradition demanded it, but because after everything, he wanted Sophia to know that he was choosing her with his whole self, not the polished version, not the desperate version, but the man who had learned that dignity was never about the job title on his badge. It was about showing up every single day for the people who mattered. He told her that he had spent 3 years believing he had nothing left to offer anyone. Not a job, not stability, not even a full night's sleep, and that somewhere between a burnt cup of coffee and a rain-soaked bus stop, she had convinced him he was wrong. He told her that Lily had asked him, just that week, whether Sophia was going to stay forever, and that he had realized, answering her, that he desperately wanted the answer to be yes. Sophia said yes before he even finished the question, laughing through tears, and Lily threw her wildflowers into the air like confetti, shouting loud enough that a passing security guard 2 floors down radioed up to ask if everything was all right. Everything, Ethan would later say, had never been more all right in his life. A year later, Ethan stood in that same rooftop garden at his wedding, string lights strung between the planters, where he had once wheeled his cleaning cart past executives who never looked up long enough to learn his name. His mother sat in the front row beside a little girl in a yellow dress who called her Grandma Diane, without a trace of hesitation, and beside them sat Sophia's own mother, who had cleaned hotel rooms for 20 years and cried through the entire ceremony without apology, telling anyone who would listen that she had known. The very first time Sophia mentioned a kind janitor with tired eyes, that something good was coming. Sophia walked toward him in white, her hand finding his the way it had been since the night she noticed a lonely man alphabetizing a supply closet, and Ethan, looking out at the small, imperfect, hard-won family gathered on that rooftop, thought that if anyone had told him 3 years earlier, standing in a supply closet buttoning a crooked uniform, that this was where the story would lead, he would not have believed a single word of it. Ethan Cole never stopped being an engineer at heart, and within the year, Diane had quietly created a position for him in the company's operations division. Not because he was her son, she insisted, but because she had read his old resumes and knew talent when she saw it, even 15 years too late. He took the job on one condition, that he never be treated as anything other than what he had earned, and Diane, to her credit, respected it. Ethan's first project review came back from a manager who had no idea he was reviewing the chairwoman's, two's son, and it came back glowing on its own merit. Lily grew up with 2 grandmothers in the stories she told at school. One she knew only through photographs and her father's careful memories, and one who showed up every single Sunday with a bag of art supplies and an opinion about glitter pens. Sophia was eventually promoted to creative director of the entire brand division, a job she earned long before anyone in the building learned her fiancé's last name carried more weight than her own resume. And she made sure, every year on the dome, anniversary of the night, she first noticed a lonely man alphabetizing a supply closet, to leave a cup of oversweet coffee on his desk, just so he would remember exactly where they started. Ethan kept, framed on the wall of his new office beside the operations floor, not a photograph of the executive suite or the gala where his life changed, but his old employee badge, gray uniform and all, a small, stubborn reminder that dignity had never once depended on the job title stitched above his pocket. If there is one thing this story wants you to carry with you, it is this. The people who show up quietly, who do the hardest, least glamorous work without complaint, who choose their children over their pride every single time, are not invisible. Somewhere, someone is watching. Somewhere, love is waiting to recognize you, even in a gray uniform with your name stitched crookedly above the pocket. It is that the hardest, quietest seasons of our lives are rarely the end of the story. They are simply the part no one else can see, the part that happens before the recognition, before the reunion, before the rooftop full of wildflowers. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that quiet love is still love, and that it is never too late to come home.